Good evening. Thank you all for coming. By the looks of it, you did get the email that went out yesterday moving the meeting to tonight, so that's good. Just a quick update on the new website project. It's 99% finished. The only thing we're waiting on at this point is to move the old mailing list from the old server to the new server. I would expect you'd be seeing an introductory email within the next week or so. No promises though this time. But I really, it is very close to being finished. Again, as soon as we get that new website up, we're going to do a nationwide membership drive like we've been talking about, so I'm certainly looking forward to that. That being said, we're going to get right into it. Our speaker tonight is Adam Taylor. As advertised, Adam will be introducing a new initiative of Catholic Action, the St. Joseph's League. It encompasses 4 specific areas of action: business, politics, education, and charity. The business portion of it being, of course, the SJBMA. The St. Joseph's League had its origin within the leadership of the SJBMA and a cell of colleagues here in St. Mary's who have been meeting over the last several years under the guidance of Father McFarland, our chaplain, and at the encouragement of Father Rastan then and Father Wagner now. We thank them for their encouragement and support for sure. Adam Taylor has generously stepped forward to lead this new initiative for Catholic Action. His family moved to St. Mary's back in 1979 in the very earliest days of the mission here. I believe the mission started in 1978, if I'm correct, so they were here from the very beginning. He graduated from St. Mary's Academy in 1990 and then subsequently went on to serve in the United States Marine Corps for over 20 years, from 1992 to 2013. In the signal and cyber intelligence field, during which time he served 3 combat tours in Iraq. He currently serves as the practice director for services organization with Cloudera, a company based in California, and he recently moved back to St. Mary's with his wife Annie and his children Ian and Isabella. We welcome him back to St. Mary's. His education: he has a bachelor degree in military history from the American Military University, and he is an adjunct faculty instructor at National Cryptologic School. We welcome Adam here with us tonight, and please join me in welcoming him to the podium. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ben, for the very kind introduction. We weren't quite here early. So my wife actually has me beat. Her family moved down here. If you know Mrs. Schibler, that's my wife's mother. They moved here in '78, right before the church burned down, actually. So she beats me on that point. So she holds that over me, too. So thank you all again for coming. I appreciate it, especially the flexibility given the shift from last night to tonight. Plane troubles and departures and the nuances of this world that, one thing falls down and everything cascades after. So, but I'm glad we're able to shift it tonight. So thank you for your flexibility and willingness to come out. So, like any good talk, I suppose I should start with a quote. So I will start with one. And it's actually taken from Dr. Senior, but he borrowed it liberally from the best source, the Bible itself. "Let your loins be girt, and lamps burning in your hands, and you yourselves be like to men who wait for their Lord." So, as Ben mentioned, I'm here to speak tonight about Catholic Action and what we're trying to do to sort of re-energize our efforts on that part. So the purpose of tonight's talk is to do a few things. The first is to talk a bit about just kind of Catholic Action overall, a little bit of taking a look backwards and seeing where it's come from, motivations for it, but then also talk about more practical terms of what we're actually putting together structure-wise to actually put it into action. because those are the two main words with this. It must be Catholic, but there must be the action. Without those two things together working in concert, it doesn't do much to advance either of those things. All right. So first of all, I'll start with, why is Catholic action needed? I mean, obviously a little bit here preaching to the choir, but I think it's worthwhile to kind of go back and take a look at this and understand kind of in the context of the Catholic Church and the Church in general, and especially the kingdom here on earth, where Catholic action has its place. So that's the first topic we talk about. The second is the structure of what we put together. And the third is going to be how we're looking for, to actually put this into action. So why is it needed? Why is Catholic action needed? The first is that we're called to do so by God, as first author, first source. And that's the most important part. You know, Christ talks to us and it talks to his disciples and said, you know, go ye forth and baptize all nations, make disciples in all nations. And that's an eternal commandment from him that passes down through the generations. From the very early days of the apostles and the disciples heading out into the world of the Gentiles, and it carries through into our days today. And I think if we look back at the church, obviously over the several millennia, you see a sort of cycle of sorts, where you start things with a small mustard seed. It grows, it grows, it grows. Then the center cannot hold, things fall apart to some extent, and then things grow back again. So there's constant renewal of our faith, and obviously that's part of God's plan. You know, we wish everything was perfect right from the get-go, the Garden of Eden, but it isn't because of our nature, and so we must go through this cycle. And so over time, there's been, you know, certain areas where Catholic action has been just part of breathing the lifeblood of Catholicism. One could think of the Middle Ages, one could think of sort of the high points of Catholicism. And, you know, there probably weren't necessarily too many Catholic action groups, because it didn't need to be. It was part of what Christendom was. It was bred into our DNA, if you want to call it that. And so it was just part of being Catholic. But then there are times, obviously, when, you know, that center doesn't hold, things fall apart, and it's, you know, God calls us to then reconstitute and regrow those efforts. And obviously it goes without saying that, you know, we can see that today's times are certainly epitomize that time again of renewal and regrowth and rebirth. I have a couple quotes. One of them is from St. Pius X in a letter he wrote in 1905 to the Catholics, primarily in Italy, where they had some Catholic action groups. And it was a bit more of guidance on what their purpose and what they should be doing. But this one here. And so he's basically talking to both the clergy as well as the laity. And he says, truly, all of us in the church are called to form that unique body, whose head is Christ, closely joined, as the Apostle Paul teaches, and knit together through every joint of the system according to the functioning in due measure of each single part. So there's a couple key phrases in there that I'd like to highlight. The first one is closely joined with the head of Christ, meaning that obviously the church as part of the body of Christ is joined with him, but then also that body of Christ, the church of Christ on earth, extends just beyond the clergy, and it also includes the laity as well. And all parts must be joined together and working together to achieve the common goal. But then also that knitting together of every joint. It's something that the gentlemen who have been at least our initial talks and meetings about restating up the Catholic Action Group, I mean, that was kind of something that called out to me, was this knitting together of what we're doing across all of it, so that it all comes together, that we're joined together. And, you know, most importantly, it's, you know, it's our motto as the society is, you know, our goal, one of our aims is to restore all things in Christ. And that's kind of that's the end goal of everything that we're trying to do here. So secondly, the why we need Catholic action is our current situation demands it. As I mentioned before, that peak and trough, that cycle of time and mankind's turning to or falling away from God. Just this week, as I was actually putting a lot of these notes together, actually finalizing my thoughts, I spent 4 days of it in Las Vegas, Nevada. So I don't know how many of you have been in Las Vegas, Nevada. Talk about an absolute contradiction in the content of tonight's talk and in what we're trying to do in that place. But strangely enough, it was actually very good, because it helped me crystallize my thoughts for this and crystallize kind of why we're doing this. To look out at a city that is purpose-built in the absolute antithesis of everything that we desire and hope for on earth. It actually helped codify and collect my thoughts, strangely enough as that might be. But one thing that really struck me about our current time and our current age is that the transient nature of things, meaning that things don't last. Things are purpose-built, especially, I believe, in this nation and in Western culture. We talk of disposable civilization, right? Buy cheaply, who cares if it breaks, buy another. But I think that extends more importantly beyond things, and it starts to extend itself out into each of us. People, relationships, friendships, bonds, organizations, groups now become transient as well. When everything is abstracted away, and my social group is primarily driven by Facebook, we're abstracted away from the reality of these kind of meetings, face-to-face interactions, the companionship, the fellowship of being Catholics. And so in today's day and age, that transient nature, again, is something that we must strive to overcome, and again, knit together in real bonds what we're trying to do to restore all things in Christ. So this is, obviously recognized by several leading thinkers, but I'll go back to one. If I sound like a little bit of a broken record, one of my favorite authors on this subject and just in general is Dr. John Senior. So obviously very familiar, to his books, Death of Christian Culture and Restoration of Christian Culture. And so, he recognizes in that, his quote, "We get the government and the education we deserve, and we shall get effective leadership when we really call for it, which means when as a nation and locally in neighborhoods and in the home, we have sight of the goal." Again, this sight of the goal of what we're trying to do. You can't reform the means, meaning all the things that we do and all the things that imbue our society with any kind of civilization at all. You can't reform the means until you know the end, and that is finally the religious question. Unless the nation, starting with neighborhoods, homes, and hearts, returns to its Christian origin and end, it will disintegrate. For leadership in every walk of life, we simply must have saints who are ordinary men and women. So I think that's very succinctly puts it and eloquently puts that here's what we're up against, here's what will happen and we see happening. But also he offers up a very simple and eloquent way of how we can combat that and how we can overcome it. And again, that goal of leadership in every walk of life, regardless of what we do. Here you all here, as part of the St. Joseph Business Society, we all walk in different ways of life. Some of us interact, with the world. Some of us have started businesses here and other places. But it's up to us in those walks of life and our professions that we do to return to that heart, neighborhood, family, and grow it out. There's also another author that I like, not a Catholic that I know of, although he's from Scotland, so one has hope, but is Neil Ferguson. But he wrote a very interesting book. It has nothing to do necessarily, particularly with religion per se, but he wrote it a couple years back, and it's called The Great Degeneration. And in it, he talks about how civilization must have these organizations, these groups that are knitted together just for it to function. And so he kind of points back to certain periods of history, but obviously certain times in Western Europe and in the United States where it was common for men to be part of manly groups. They had everything from, clubs for smoking cigars and sharing a drink, to hunting clubs, to civic clubs, to church clubs, to these things, these organizations that men belong to. And it was a place for men to come together, have those personal relationships, build those bonds, and knit together those frameworks. And he laments that those are, have been disintegrating slowly and slowly. This great degeneration of this fabric of society that is, again, like Dr. Senior laments its passing, but that also gives us some hope of how we reconstruct it. And so this as an example. You know, the work that you guys have done here with the St. Joseph Business Association is an example of how you rebuild those things. Bless you. So the last point I'll make in terms of why we should do this is obviously the church calls us to it. And by the church, I mean the church in general, as the church of body of Christ, but also specifically, as Ben mentioned before, you know, in our own terms within the society. You know, Father Rostan, you know, is relayed to me by some of the gentlemen, you know, a few years back, really kind of made that first initial call to action to say, you know, we must have this, we need to do this within the society. And then again, echoed by Father Wegner and others. But that, you know, just for me, from my own perspective, you know, being here very early days, memories of tearing things out of this building and removing old junk and painting walls. And I know, you know, you were here, you know, and your brothers were right here doing some of that. Some of you all sit here. You remember when the chapel was full of cooking equipment and we had to re-scrape paint, and we built this thing from the ground up, right? And then, you know, going through different periods of time, almost like the history of St. Mary's, and these snapshots of it slowly rebuilding that kernel and building it out, that, you know, then you take one step back, so you look at St. Mary's as just kind of a little bit of a microcosm, and you say, okay, wow, you know, I mean, in 20 years, like when I left here and I would come back incrementally, I was just amazed at the growth. And just, you know, it's amazing. I mean, school today is, what, 800 children thereabouts? You know, it's just incredible. So that it's one thing that's fantastic. There's the fruits, right? You shall know it by its fruits. And it's amazing to see. And it's amazing, especially for me to see, to come back to see those of you that are doing the work outside of the parish and building businesses and building that strong community, you know, offering our youth, providing jobs for our youth, and for them to have a good Catholic environment as they're working in their walks of life. So that's very wonderful to see and amazing. But then I take a step back even further a little bit, and if the Syracuse folks are alive on this, as I hope they are, then now you take the sort of a macro view of the society as a whole over the past 30 years, and I think we've finally gotten to the point where we're beyond just building from the get-go, right? Sort of scraping the paint off of things and refurbishing. We're now ready to start growing even further. And I'll touch upon that point a little bit later on, but the society itself needs to start linking together at a larger scale, where we start combining our efforts across parishes, across communities, to knit those bonds even further out than just our own community. So, all that said, there's the why. So then the next question is, what shall we do? What shall we do to enable this? So I'll really quickly just go to the purpose, of the St. Joseph's League. And I put a little bit of thought into this, and obviously got guidance from other gentlemen that were involved, and also Father McFarland as well, and Father Beck. But I'll just simply read the mission statement that we put together for the St. Joseph's League. So the St. Joseph's League is a Catholic action organization dedicated to advancing the reign of Christ the King in accordance with traditional Catholic principles laid down by the Church's perennial magisterium. It seeks to advance this reign in the political, economic, and social spheres by any legitimate means. The League places itself under the spiritual guidance of the Priestly Society of St. Pius X as the surest voice of Catholic orthodoxy in the world today. So there you have it. Advancing the reign of Christ the King by any legitimate means in the political, economic, and social sphere. So, you know, I talked before about the concept of knitting together. And so, you know, another sort of favorite analogy of mine is the tapestry. If you think of the great tapestry, any great tapestries, but you know, you think of the ones that hung in the great halls and cathedrals of the Middle Ages, the millions and, you know, total threads that built that up. You know, that was a painstaking process of weaving those things together. Many hands in the work. And so one of the things when I was considering the Catholic Action League and those things, and you know, I said it when we kind of had our opening meeting, is the purpose in that mission statement is not to impose, you know, sort of this false structure or any of those things on top of what's already being done. There's lots of things being done already to promote the reign of Christ the King and to grow our society and civilization. But rather than to start to knit together what's already in place. So think of it more of that way. That's our goal, is to take things that the St. Joseph Business Association is already doing and pull those things together where we can and apply them. Take things that we're doing in the political realm, both locally but also, if we can, somewhat nationally, pull those threads together. Charity work. So there's tons of charity work, and charity is probably the one area that you want to have the lightest touch on, because you want charity to be of the heart. Forced charity is no good charity at all, right? It's tinkling brass. But there are ways that we can leverage different things and different methods to bring that together and knit it together. And the same with education. To me, education is one of those areas that kind of binds everything together. Obviously, you've had many speakers throughout here over the past few years talking about things. That's a form of education, but there's also other things that we can be doing around business in general. We can be doing them around politics. All those things kind of come together. But really the goal is to knit all those together. So as Ben mentioned, I'll reiterate briefly, our four main pillars are business, politics, education, and charity. And actually, I'll go ahead and introduce a few of the folks that are leading those efforts. So the business lead is Mr. Ben Moats. The political lead makes no sense, or makes complete sense. Francis Abraham. You like that?
Oh, you bet.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yes. The education lead was Mr. Jim Vogel. And for now, temporarily, I'm actually running the charity arm of the league at the moment. Francis sort of pushed me in that direction, at least to kick off one or two of our first events, as in the St. Joseph's Table that's upcoming in March, just to kind of get through the process and sort of set some of the framework in place. And then we've also going to have some assistants as well, because one of the things we wanted to do, both internally but then also with some advisors. So Mr. Ken Moats and Mr. John DeLoya are actually advisors to the league, and because we wanted to be able to we want to be able to learn from and gather from the wisdom of our elders in good tradition of any civilization, and then pull that through to what we're doing. But then also we want to start to bring up our youth. And so in the assistants, we're kind of looking for good, strong young adults, young men who are willing and able and energetic about this work, that can start bringing them along as well. Start to imbue them with these principles, give them the guidance so that someday they can take over and continue this work. Just logistically, we meet for the league itself. We've planned it out. We're going to meet every 2 months, so 6 times throughout the year. And over the course of the year, we basically decided to start with small projects. I'm sure many of you have heard of the "how do you eat an elephant" analogy. The answer is one bite at a time, right? I mean, it's about the only way you can do it. But that's kind of what our purpose, and to start off with, is to say, get simple but effective, meaningful, and worthwhile projects and tackle those. Let's get through those, and then let's just incrementally build on that every single year. Some of the events will be repeatable. For example, St. Joseph's Table will be one of those things that will be kind of a yearly thing, but then we're looking to expand into some other areas. Obviously, this year for politics is a big year with the election cycle, so we're very business there. Ben's been working on, as you mentioned, the website to revamp that. And within the education piece, Jim Vogel's going to be working to renew sort of a new set of speakers and diversify a little bit of the topic set as well. So as we go through the year, obviously we'll be publishing kind of those things that are events and things for obviously the business group here, but also the parish at large. So then on to how we're going to do it. I already talked about the eat the elephant analogy, but there's another one that I'll borrow very liberally from the Marine Corps, is this concept of act tactically but think strategically. Right? What that means is do what you have to do now, but don't forget the long-term vision. And I think that's something that's very deeply important, is this multi-generational view of what we're doing and what we want to do and what we need to do, and that we can't be satisfied with just moving the bar an inch and then saying, walking away, we moved it an inch. Bully on us, we're done. No, we must continue to do it, and then we must also look behind us and pull through the folks who will do that generation 2, 3 generations from now. And so with that in mind, part of what we're trying to do with the St. Joseph League as well is apply a bit of structure to everything that we're doing to capture it so that it can be repeated in future by those who pick it up, and not everything's being redone all the time. And that's got a twofold purpose. One is just practical purpose for locally for the things we're going to do through the year, is that we have that record and we have a means of saying, hey, if I want to do a charity fundraiser event, here's a ready-made set of materials that you can go and do that. Everybody here is busy. All you gentlemen are very busy, and we're all busy, with jobs, family, and everything else that comes along. And so as much as we can do to enable those kind of things and carry them off better is good for everybody. But then I think also, and again, with broadcasting out to the rest of the society, the hope is that we can start to share those same materials out for other parishes, especially ones who are earlier in their journey than St. Mary's is, where they're looking to get started on this sooner than later, so that we can share those back and forth as things that we can kind of keep in our repository and repeat again and again. But then also, again, that standpoint of bringing up the new generation, get them involved in this so that it becomes, again, back to that analogy in the Middle Ages, that Catholic action is just part of being a Catholic. It's not something you necessarily have to put a structure around. We need to do that for now, because that's where we are, but eventually 2, 3 generations from now, this should just be part of what they do. So one of the things looking forward to a little bit is the expansion. So I kind of described how we're going to do what we're going to do, at least the main areas of work for this next year, but then talking about sort of the longer term view, again, going back to the thinking strategically pieces. There's probably 2 areas for what I'll call sort of expansion. So one of those is going to be obviously just here, as we start to get this under our belt and we start to carry these things out, how do we expand what we can do with the St. Joseph Business Association, either through the website and a greater outreach there and making it easier for people to find jobs as they move, or homes, and enable those folks. Expanding works of the charity that we can do within this community here. But then I want to even say expanding it out either beyond the reach of our parish here, and then even beyond the reach outside within the society, but in the outside parishes. And kind of maybe the best way I can describe that is in military intelligence, one of the things is know your enemy, right? You have to know your target, you have to know these people. And so one of the best actually training classes we ever got going over to Iraq was actually from, strangely enough, was from some New York policemen. Because what they gave us was actually an insight into how culture works. Because unless you understand the culture, the constructs on the other side of you, you won't understand how to win their hearts and minds. However, which way you do that. But it was very interesting to me because you talk about these concentric circles, right? These expanding concentric circles. So there's something in the middle. There's something that's core to a civilization that starts there, and then there's layers that essentially go out from it. So obviously for Catholics, it starts, that core is God, right? Everything that starts there. And then depending on kind of where you are in the world, but largely it's family is outside of that, community is outside of that, or parish, then your county, your district, eventually moving out to your nation as you go out. And there's 2 things there. One is just sort of, that's how civilizations grow, from these kernels of groups of people with like-minded thoughts and goals and common interests, and they move outwards. But also in terms of what's most important in aligning yourself to the right things. And so we can't forget that at that center is always God, right? That's the purpose for anything that we're doing with Catholic Action, is for Him, and not for glory or not for anything else like that. That's the primary focus. But then as we start to expand out, we start with our homes, we start with ourselves and our families, and then we start to work this way out. And I would even say that here within the town of St. Mary's, that going beyond just the boundaries of our parish with our works of charity or even education are good and valuable things to do. I was talking with one of the ladies at the parish last night who was calling me about the St. Joseph's table. We actually ended up talking about this for a while. And, she had mentioned some things that they had done over the past year with pro-life marches and other things that are sort of outside of the direct parish itself, but are influencing outside of the parish and into the rest of the world, either with other Catholics or even with non-Catholics. Because that's also our goal as well. We can't just hide in a hole. We must push the boundaries out steadily and steadily. So the last sort of anecdote I'll give here is I remember a talk that my father did, 20 plus years ago. He and I was on leave for the military, and he was living in Idaho, and we took this 2-day road trip down from northern Idaho down to see Father Cyprian at the monastery, Our Lady of Guadalupe. And of course then it was like one building and stuff all over. He had like 3 or 4 monks. Very early stages, but on the second day we were down there, he gave this great talk. And it basically was describing kind of the ages of Catholicism. But what he did is he kind of tied it and aligned it to 3 key religious figures, and specifically, in the religious life itself. And so he kind of described it as there was the age of Benedict, there was the age of the Dominicans, and there was the age of the Jesuits. And again, going back to that kind of concentric rings and sphere of influence, Saint Benedict, the story of him looking at Rome, and what does he do? Right? He turns on his heel and walks away and goes to the desert. And so in a way, if you think of kind of, post-Vatican II, places like this that were started, it was in a way that kind of turning on your heel and saying, this cannot be, we must go preserve this kernel of truth, the truth. And then you move to the age of the Dominicans, when now you had the age of Benedict had grown up, the monasteries had spread, and now you were beginning into teaching and the flourishing of teaching and education and building up that Catholic civilization. And then obviously you go to the Jesuits in the age of serious global evangelization, where now they go out to the world. Now, say what you will about the Jesuits, and but for that was their purpose. And so, looking back at that kind of microcosm, I think that here within society and church at large, we've had sort of our mini age of Saint Benedict. We came together, we found common goals and common truth in what we were doing, and we're kind of at that stage where Saint Benedict just didn't live in the desert for the rest of his years by himself. What did he do? He went out and he gathered other like-minded men. He banded them together because he knew that you cannot be an island, right? God does not want us to be an island. He brought them together, built them up, and then spread them out. And less by their teaching per se, overt teaching, but more by their good works and example. And because just the beacons of light that those monasteries were, they built Christendom back from the Dark Ages. There's several great books written on that. I can't remember the titles of them right now, of course, but there's a couple in particular. And it's amazing, if you've had the chance to go to Europe and go stand in these monasteries and see what just absolute beacons of light and truth they were, but also their impact on the civilization around them. It was incredible. Life was at one time centered around monasteries, economic, social, everything else. We'll get there someday, hopefully. We'll work on it. But kind of getting into that, I think this now is our time to now sort of expand out and start to reach out and knit together again these different groups, move into kind of, if you will, the age of St. Dominic and what produced St. Thomas Aquinas and the ones after him that reflourished and regrew that church after the Dark Ages. So, all those things said, kind of wrap things up, but by kind of restating a few things. So the first one is that Catholic action, again, must simply put, has to be both Catholic and action. It must have action. There must be doing. And so obviously in the Catholic arena, we're adherents to the guidance of the Society of St. Pius X, but also the teachings of the Church. Obviously, I pulled heavily from St. Pius X, but there's others that will continue to guide us. But that action is doing and not just saying. It's know when to act and when to put things in place. The task is daunting, for sure. And all of us in our own way can speak to the different journey that got us here and the troubles and the sufferings and the sacrifices we've made to be here. But we can live with the hope that we know that God is there, God is good, and He will give us the grace and strength to do what we must do, as long as we're doing it for the right reasons. So our hope and faith is buoyed by that knowledge and helps keep us afloat. But it's enacted and it's carried out by charity. And I think that, to me, that's, and I'm saying nothing more than St. Paul, right? But I mean, I think above all these four pillars, the greatest of these is charity. And, to me, if we did nothing else in the Catholic Action, it would start with charity. Charity to ourselves, charity to our neighbors, charity to those around us. Who is my neighbor? Neighbors, anybody. It's the beggar on the side of the road. So those kind of things. So I started with a quote. I'll end with a quote, if you permit me so. And it's actually a bit of a larger way that Dr. Senior ends his book on the restoration of Christian culture. So, of course, we shall go on with our human life and scratch our less innocent selves as we wait for the end. I am not suggesting that we hide in cellars, hoarding survival stocks against the coming of the Antichrist. Quite the contrary. Let your loins be girt and the lamps burning in your hands, and you yourselves be like men who wait for their Lord. We must get calmly on with our work and our taxes, redeeming the time and our station in life, even while the miraculous birth and the martyrdom occur, anyhow in a corner, perhaps in some unlikely Bethlehem like our own backyard. There may be someone reading these words right now who, like St. Margaret Mary or St. Catherine Labouré, unknown as yet to herself, is the focal point of a great historical change. All over this world at this very hour, Mary and her angels are moving among the human race. If we consecrate our hearts to hers, we shall be among those who make a difference. Mary's love is first of all directed to her priests, who are of first importance because, in a sense, the Eucharist is the Church itself, and because the priests, its indispensable instrument. But secondarily, her love includes religious and laity who assist at the sacrifice, and even the least among us, troubled by sins and failures, will share the splendid moment in the history of the Church, because not only His sheep, but her goats are called for, whom, if we love her, somehow, anyhow, in a corner, a marvelous child will fall out of the sky, and she will make us subdue us to His will, despite the darkness of Egypt and the darkness in ourselves. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Adam. An excellent introduction. A few things came to mind, a few points came to mind as you were talking, a few things that I neglected to mention earlier as well, but just one important point. Adam, being a military guy, is great at identifying tasks and getting them done. That's been a criticism of the SJBMA over the years, is that we haven't been able to identify specific tasks and move on those tasks. It's great that Adam is now going to be our guy, and already like he did mention in his talk, we have identified 4 at least small things to start eating that elephant. In each one of those groups, we have one thing to do. For business, for us, for this year, is just getting this website up and running smoothly. The jobs postings working really well nationwide. The network, adding membership, just adding to that network of members for the SJBMA. The political group Francis is working on the upcoming city elections, I believe. That's one of the main things. And there's also other state and elections he might also be working with, as well as more local, our county elections. He's going to be working on elections mainly. That's his goal. He will probably give us a talk at some point during one of these talks as to what specifically he's working on, hopefully. But that's what they're working on. The education group, I believe, is supposed to be coming up with our talks. That's one of their primary focuses, is coming up with speakers for this series throughout the year. And then the charity, the big thing, is the St. Joseph's table. Here in St. Mary's, last year, the SJBMA took it over, and I think we did $20,000 or something. We raised $20,000, over $20,000, which was, I believe, for sure, quite a record, maybe double the record. I'm not certain on that. But the men in this group were very generous in helping with that. And so I wanted to throw out there that we will need, Adam will need your help with setup and tear down if possible. So you might be seeing an email from him on that through our email system. So the other piece on that, we do have some people, I believe, joining us online from Syracuse. Welcome. The goal, hopefully, with this is to, especially with the tables, hopefully we can get other parishes throughout the country that aren't doing it already to get a group of men with our template and really get these St. Joseph's tables going around the country. I think that would be a great thing. And not only that, but just in general, devotion to St. Joseph. March is coming up. I hope that it's a mark of our group as we go forward throughout the country that we increase awareness to St. Joseph and really honor him as men more properly. So March is coming up. Please make an effort to, especially on the Feast of St. Joseph, go to Mass, pray for our apostolate. I think it's very important, and he is, as we know, a very, very powerful patron. So please keep that in mind. The other thing is we are in each one of these groups, as Adam mentioned, the 4 areas, we have an assistant assisting the guy in charge of it. I'm looking for a business assistant. So if any of you know of a good young guy that can start planning some of these meetings, introducing people, kind of getting some good experience with doing that, that's a great way that our group can help young guys get some experience. So I am looking for that special guy right now. Please put some names forward if you have them, and we'll interview them, or however we need to do if there's more than one. The next meeting, hopefully that website will be done, and we will hopefully be walking through how to use the tools on that website. And other than that, I believe that's all I have to say. And are there any questions for Adam, by the way? And with that, I'll end it, and we can ask questions as you will, and network as you will as well. Any questions?
So, is the next meeting, you say in 2 months?
The next meeting is probably going to be in 2 months, because Holy Thursday, I believe, is our regular scheduled meeting. So I just told the lady at the bulletin just to cancel it in the bulletin, so there's no confusion. We're just going to do it in 2 months. Yes, the next SJBMA meeting.
I guess can I keep going?
Sure.
I mean, I'm trying to get my arms around it. It sounds like a great, I'm excited about it, but I mean, so the St. Joseph's Business Association, is it now going to be called the St. Joseph's League, or do we add more pillars, or
So that's a good question. Actually, the St. Joseph Business Association actually just dovetails in with the overall Catholic Action Group. So it's part of the business pillar. So it functions just as it has been, just as it.
We're adding
was,
3
so,
pillars to it, yes.
to go along with it. So.
Thank you for showing up, Adam. Excellent presentation. I enjoyed it. Maybe give us a little bit of background about where you came up with this inspirational idea of having like an overseeing committee for these 4 pillars. What was your inspiration?
Well, my direct inspiration was actually, I've been here just about 3 years. Well, actually, no, I've been here 3 years now since I moved back. And I kind of just taking the time to kind of reacquaint myself with St. Mary's because I needed to, because it's gotten so much bigger. There's a lot more people, there's a lot more things going on. Obviously it's something you can tell I'm passionate about. But what I didn't want to do is just jump straight in and just start wading right in, good old Marine Jarhead style, right? Without knowing kind of what's in place already, what's already being done. So I attended some of the meetings here, been to some of the city council meetings, and just kind of just getting to know people again in the community. And then, I don't know, it was maybe 2-3 months, well, maybe a little longer than that, 4 or 5 months ago, I saw Francis Sawerkamp actually in Rays, and I said, I've got a bunch of ideas just spinning around in my head that I just need someone to go bounce them off of, to make sure, one, I'm not insane, which I'm still not convinced it's not true. And the other one is just to say, I don't want to go out there and do anything else that anybody else is doing. And so thankfully Francis was like, yeah, well, come over to the house, right? So we chatted for a while, and I kind of just jumbly laid out kind of these ideas that I had around getting more community, togetherness, being a little bit more structured in kind of how we're going after these things, tying together the good work that's already being done here, and then figuring out a way to kind of make that repeatable so that we're not having to do it, over and over the same time again with a lot of effort. And Francis very kindly said, well, there was this thing called Catholic Action Group that Father Rostand talked to us about a couple years ago. We've been kind of doing it. How would you like to take it over? So no, all joking aside, I jumped at the chance. I mean, it was exactly what I was looking for. So very providentially, the Holy Spirit moved me and Rays, and then at Francis' house. But yeah, that's kind of how I came to this.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Yeah, so, more to the point, Catholic Action actually started as a French organization, right? And I'm not sure when it started. Ben, do you recall?
The
Was it 1950s? Was it
30s.
30s, okay.
30s.
So, France has been through a lot of turmoil, a lot of anti-Catholic movements. And so a group of guys got together and said, basically, we need to put a stop to this. How are we going to do it? We're going to organize as Catholics, and we're going to start fighting and opposing all these radical ideas. And so I'm not sure really who organized it in France, but it's been around forever. And so then Father Rostand, being the Frenchman, he, I don't know, did he talk to Jim, did he talk to
It was
Francis?
actually Father McFarland. So in our discussions
Okay.
with the SJBMA, wanting to do more specific actions, he ended up going to Father Rostand to talk about it as well. Father Rostand encouraged it. This was maybe 2 years ago.
Or three. It was
Or three, maybe. So then the board of the SJBMA and maybe, 10 other guys have been meeting we met pretty regularly for the first couple years. And then the last year, it just got too much with the SJBMA and, for me, Shakespeare. And so it kind of got pretty quiet there. And then a year later, then Francis runs into Adam, and there's the man to take it over.
Yeah, so the bottom line is we're kind of copying this French organization. And what we're trying to do is put Catholic principles into action and actually make a difference in the world that we live in. I think it's astonishing, it's depressing, it's discouraging. Did anybody watch the Republican debate last night? What a joke. What a joke.
Otherwise known as the three-ring circus.
Yeah, just ridiculous. So, it's an effort to do something positive. Can't do everything at once, so we picked 4 things.
Well, it was kind of help focus, so those 4 pillars, kind of how we got to that was just kind of think of like, what are the kind of the main areas that within civil society that you would need to kind of do those, so it helps spread out some of the work hopefully too.
And Father Rostand has been, he came to a number of those meetings and was pretty heavily involved there for a while. So he's been encouraging it a lot. And Father Wagner has carried that on. Sorry, Mr. Brown. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned St. Joseph's to do a lot more.
Yes.
So I'm gonna put a plug in if you don't mind.
Sure.
Recently, I've taken over as coordinator for Perpetual Adoration. When you talk about more for St. Joseph, where more for St. Joseph will be is in the chapel.
Mhm.
It's astounding for a community like ours or a parish. And I'm working with Father Beck. I did a census when I took over. Adam, you talk about knowing where you're at. We only have 155 parishioners who are signed up for Perpetual Adoration in a parish this size. And I can look around, and I can look around of men in the community, men in the parish, and there are very few. So if we want to start to make a difference, where it will start to make a difference when we're in the chapel in front of St. Joseph, in front of our Lord, and that's where we need to pray. And if that's one of the pillars, and again, I know Father Beck and I are working on it. He's been meeting with me a couple weeks to get this together.
Mhm.
And I think that you'll hear more on it later. But when I hear that you're talking about that's one of the pillars, and maybe because, Adam, you talk about getting involved, when I look at the census for the parish, that we only have 155 people in the size we do, that's one pillar right there that we can start to take care of when we're all in front of the chapel.
Yeah, I agree. We have to convert ourselves really before
So,
going out.
So having said that, go to perpetual adoration at smac.edu, send an email, or we have our own phone line now. You don't have to call a parishioner. You dial the switchboard number. It's actually extension 247. Anybody gets it? 24/7 for perpetual adoration. So send an email or give a voicemail. I'll be happy to call you back and sign you up.
Thanks for that plug, sir. Any other questions or comments?
You're running for county commissioner, is that
Oh,
correct?
God, no. No, just city commission.
City commissioner.
Yes, Adam and Pat Murtha are both running, as far as we know, uncontested
For 2 seats?
for two open seats
Whose seats?
in
are
the
open?
city. The seats that are open are Adam Moats is not rerunning, and
Mike, you're here.
Mike Drape. His term is up, I believe, and he's not rerunning. So, that's a question for Francis. That's his realm of expertise.
I will take the opportunity to do another shameless plug, and that one is for the St. Joseph's Table. So the date is March 14th. Is that right? 13th. It's Sunday, so that's the Sunday, either the 13th, 14th, I can't remember it now. So it's not too long away. I've been working with a lot of the ladies of the parish and other folks around coordinating auction items and those kind of things. So there was an insert full of bulletins, so you'll see one this Sunday, you'll see one next Sunday as well. But just I strongly encourage obviously to attend. If there's things that you or your business can donate for the auction itself, we're a charity. So, let me know. There's in the bulletin, there's contact information, and make it a very good event.
Has Father set what the money's gonna go towards this year?
No, I haven't. So I've sent Father Angel an email. Actually, it was earlier this morning. He hasn't responded back on that one yet. One of the intentions, as was one of the intentions last year, was for votive masses to be offered for our priests, our nuns, and for vocations. And then the other part of it was for the altar.
The new altars
Yeah.
downstairs in the bottom of Copans for the priests to say private masses on. I don't know what happened with that, but usually the masses are used for, the money is used for masses for priests,
Yeah.
I believe, or the poor souls. So that's most likely what it will be, but
Yeah, so I'll find out from Father Angelo here soon. I'll talk to him tomorrow.
anything else? All All right, let's go ahead and close, and then you're welcome to stay and visit.